Happy Sunday, everyone. That little beep right there was my oven preheating. Tonight we're going to make a chicken pot pie, something I've never done before. There's a lot of firsts here this week while we're in our houses, going maybe a little stir crazy and taking some chances. So tonight I have already done a few things. About an hour ago, maybe an hour and a half ago, I made a pâte brisée, which is a pie crust. It's the dough, and I'm about to pull that out of the refrigerator. It's been resting. So I've made just one pâte brisée, which is right here. It is butter, flour, a little bit of salt, a little bit of ice cold water. We're keeping the butter, we actually went into the flour with fingers and broke the butter apart. I didn't want to melt the butter because as it cooks, the butter is actually going to melt and make it really flaky and gorgeous, or so we hope. I have made pâte brisée at the restaurant before, but have not used it in this application and not as just the top. So timing wise on the oven, hopefully we get this all right. The other thing I've done already is I had a chicken thigh that we had from our roast chicken the other day. We're gonna cut that up, but I reinforced it, I guess, with a little bit of chicken breast that we have sauteed. So that's already there. I've actually cooled it down. It's in the freezer right now. It's been cooked because we want it cold in this pie because I don't want to overcook that chicken too much. So here we go. So let's start things off. Right here is the cast iron pan I used for the chicken. I have not cleaned it out, and that's on purpose. Back here on this back burner, I have some chicken stock. And this is the chicken stock that I made a few nights ago with the chicken bones from that roast chicken. So, and all of the vegetables that were underneath, if you remember. So that sat on the stovetop for about 18 hours and really reduced in this gorgeous stock. And so that's gonna warm up. We're gonna make a roux, and then we're gonna make our sauce for the inside of the pie with all of that. The other things we need are that chicken I talked about. We're going to use a Dutch oven here. If you don't have a Dutch oven, a Pyrex would do. I do all sorts of different things, but this will be what we're going to build our pie in. I'm going to bring it down to the cutting board, and here we go. So here is our workstation. So we're going to put some onion, some celery, some carrots. We're going to have that beautiful stock that we have on the oven, the chicken, a little bit of herbs, and then we'll top it off with that pie crust. So let's build this guy. I prefer not cooking these vegetables first because I want them to have a little bit of texture. I have peeled the carrots. If you don't want to, it's definitely not a necessity. Just make sure you wash them really well. So I'm going to just cut off the top and bottom here. One thing I do want to do is try and have equal pieces. And when I say equal, it doesn't necessarily mean the same length. It means equal bites. So I see with these carrots that I have some skinnier ends here and then a thicker end. So I'm actually not lining them up perfectly because I want to have a consistent cook. So I'm going to go right about here for that first one. And now I should be relatively even. And the further up I go and the thicker the carrot gets, the thinner I'm going to slice it so that we'll have kind of even cooking. So obviously this and this are going to try and cook about the same, where if I sliced it this thick, it would take forever to cook the inside of this guy. So you can just keep going here. I do have one little straggler carrot that's still kind of thin, so I'm gonna slice this one separately. And then I'm going to bring all these guys together and slice them relatively thin because we're looking for kind of that same bite each time, that same chew. They'll be in the oven about 40 minutes, so they will soften up. We just don't want them too hard. Carrots are going to be right at the very bottom. You want to put the hardest vegetable at the bottom, because that's going to sit in all of the sauce and it'll aid in the cooking and help soften the carrots. I'm going to turn our stock down a little bit. Next up will be celery. Kind of the same rule of thumb here. I am going to just barely slice off the tops because I see a few little dead spots. And then I'm going to probably slice the bottom right about where it starts to go pure white. So with this celery, I want to always cut it so that the ribs are facing up. If I have the ribs flat down on the cutting board, that's where you end up having those ribs stick to the cutting board. The knife doesn't get through it as easily, and then you get those strings that, I don't know if you've had the celery thing and it gets stuck in your teeth, but kind of annoying. Two ways. I have only 4 stalks of celery here. I could either stack them 2 and 2, I could go 4 on top, whatever's easiest for me. I think for what I have here, I'm going to go with the stack 2 and 2. So I don't want to make it super paper thin because they'll disappear. So I'm going to make same thing, some kind of bite-sized pieces. We'll call this a rustic cut. So now I'm up toward the thicker part of the celery. Once I'm here, I'm going to slice these guys in half. And at this point, I'll probably, because these are a little thinner, these will probably be a little thicker so that that cook is pretty even. Almost there. All right, so we have our celery. That's going to go in second. This I want to kind of evenly disperse around the bottom of this Dutch oven, because as it cooks, I want to be able, once it's done, I want to be able to scoop right in and kind of get a composed bite each time. Next, I'll put an onion in. Just like every other time, I always take the head off and then I slice it in half. I'll take the peel off. I peel off one more layer than I think because I want to have kind of a good texture in each bite. And there's our workable onion. So with this, it's going to be that same thing. I'm not trying to slice them too thin. I want to have good bite each time. So I'm just going to go down about this size to start. Let's make sure you can see here. Looks kind of bright. Let me see if I can fix that. I don't know if I can. So we're gonna go maybe right there with it. There's our onion, that's gonna go in next. I've not salted anything yet. At this point, I'm going to season the vegetables. I'm just pulling these onions apart so that I'm not getting a clump of onions. I'm just going through and separating them. All right, that looks pretty good. Here, I'll show you what we're working with right now. So it's just celery, carrots, onions, 3 layers, kind of spread out. Next up, I'm going to clear off the vegetables on my cutting board. I have no more vegetables that I'm going to cut. I'm going to bring over the chicken. One thing I don't want to do is overdo it with chicken here. This is the chicken that I've already cooked. It was just in the freezer to help it cool down. And then I have one piece left from the other night. So this is a great way to utilize any leftovers you might have. So with this, I'm really just trying to get the bone away from the meat. You can kind of pull it a little bit to start it. It's a lot easier to work with when it's warm, but it's a lot easier to handle when it's cold. So it's really just coming through and ripping this off, getting this thigh bone out. I have a little bit of usable meat, I'll pull that right off. And then a lot of this stuff I'm gonna leave on because I wanna have a good texture in each bite. So the other things I'm feeling for are, because this was part of a whole chicken, this is a little piece of bone that I'm not gonna use. And the rest of this should be usable. For what we're doing here, I'm not going to use the skin because it will get soggy in this liquid. If you do have a frying pan on the side and just want to have a neat little garnish of chicken skin, you can throw it right in and crisp it up. And I do feel one more little bone here. Bone. All right, so here is our chicken. I'm going to put it in some bite-sized pieces. It'll go right in here with this breast. Anything that's too tough to cut through is going to be too tough to bite through too. So if you have any issues where you're really trying to work at cutting through it, just get rid of that piece. All right, all of that looks good. It'll go right in here with the breast. And then all of this I'm going to mix up. I did leave the liquid that came off of the breast in there, and it's going to go right here on top of the pan. And this one is important to make sure that you get it spread around well. Be right back. Be washing my hands, and then we'll get to the dough on top. Actually, I almost forgot. Before we do the dough, we're going to make a roux, and we're going to make the sauce that's going to go inside. So to make a roux, the best method, and this is adapted from Julia Child, is to get your butter melted in the pan first. You want to have about 50-50 butter to flour, and we want to make sure that the butter starts to melt so that the flour can cook in the roux. So you can kind of use the side to guide. I mean, right here I'm halfway through the third of a cup. I see how much I have here. I'm probably gonna go maybe a quarter cup. So here's my quarter cup measurements, and it looks like it's gonna go right to about maybe here. And if it's not exact, and you always have to throw a little bit more flour in, that's no problem. So here's our butter that's going to go right into the pan. Here's our quarter cup measurement. I'm resting the camera here on the flour, so I'm going to bring this up. So there's our flour. This will set right here on the side. And off we go. While the butter's melting, let's see if we have any... Wow, we have a lot of people that have tuned in. Hi, everyone. Okay, so our pie dough is here. Our butter is getting to that melted stage. Probably have just another, not even minute. I'm going to use a rubber spatula and a fork for this. So the rubber spatula is going to help me get the sides when I need it, and the fork is going to help me break up any of the pieces of flour that are starting to melt together. All right, so it's melted. Good enough for me. Flour is going to go right in. I have this on medium heat. Now I'm going to start stirring. So I want this flour to be fully incorporated with the butter, and this is going to be what thickens our sauce. I may add just a pinch more flour here based on what I'm seeing. So you can see where we are. So I think for this I may add just a smidge more. This keeps going, and here's where we are now with this roux. I want to make sure that I get that flour starting to cook. The taste of raw flour is just not that appealing. So this is where I'm going to use the rubber spatula, go along the sides, get any of these little pieces that might be here, bring it down into the pan, give it probably 1 or 2 more stirs. It's now bubbling nicely. I can actually smell it cooking. And at this point, I'm going to take my chicken stock that's hot. I'm going to add it. I have plenty of chicken stock in here. Anytime you think you have enough, add just a little bit more. Because this is one of those dishes especially that can use the liquid. So I'm adding hot stock into this roux. Kind of eyeballing the size of the pot that we have. I want to make sure that I'm getting plenty of this gravy that we're making. I'm going to incorporate it here with my fork. At this point, if you have heavy cream, that's a great thing to add. We don't. We have 2% milk. So what I'm going to do is add the 2% milk, but let it cook for just a little bit longer for some of that liquid to burn off. And then after we add the milk, I'll taste it and we'll season it from there. I'd add just a little bit more. Bring it over to it. So here is our Dutch oven. Here's our sauce. We're going to get that heated back up. And then the last thing we'll do is that pie crust. The oven is already heated to 400 degrees. The crust has a ton of butter in it. So once we lay it on top, we really won't need to do anything else. So this is going to heat back up. I'm going to grab a spoon. Before it gets to the boiling stage, I'm going to see where we are seasoning wise. Now remember, we did not season the vegetables at all. We're going to season this liquid pretty heavily because it's going to do the job of seasoning the vegetables once it does incorporate. So, because I don't season the stock too much, I always want it to be kind of that starting point. I can always add salt to it. It's hard to take salt away. I'm going to add a pretty reasonable amount of salt here, probably 3 good pinches. Going to add black pepper. And this is where you get to get creative and kind of add whatever other herbs that you have in here. I kind of like savory for this one. So savory is a combination of herbs that has, can sometimes have fennel. This one smells like rosemary, thyme, tarragon. Smells pretty delicious. So we're gonna add some of that in there. You can see the rosemary. And we're adding it to the liquid so that it kind of loses that dry texture and opens up in the sauce. So when I taste this, it should actually taste somewhat salty. It's fine if it's a little too salty for your liking, because once it incorporates with everything else, which is exactly where we are, just at that edge of, oh wow, I put a lot of salt in there. You don't want it to be, oh wow, I just killed my palate with salt, but you want it to definitely taste salty because we want to season these. So I'm just before back to boil. At this point, I'm going to pour this right on top and coat everything in this sauce, and it smells really, really good. If your sauce is a little too thick, you're completely welcome to add a little bit of chicken stock into it. I would highly recommend not adding water. If you end up with this at the bottom of the pan, it's fine to add, but what I'm going to do is add just a little stock to dilute it. And if you've ever smelled chicken and biscuits before, and that neat smell you get with the biscuits in that great sauce, which is really kind of similar. This is what I'm getting here with the roux and the chicken stock. And then once we add that savory herb, it's really, smells great in here. All right, so that'll finish on top. I'm gonna move this out of the way. At this point, I have no problem taking this Dutch oven, setting it right on the burner, even though it was hot, because the Dutch oven can handle that heat. So now we have that pie crust. Sat in the refrigerator about an hour and a half. It was 1 1/3 cups of flour, about a 1/4 tablespoon of salt, a little bit of sugar, and then about 10 what I'd call sticks of butter. And you can actually see the pieces of butter in here, just getting ready for us. So I'm gonna dust the board with flour. I don't want to overwork this because I don't want it to become dense, and I don't want it to lose that flakiness that we're going for. So I like the pieces of butter. Those will melt and help the flakiness. At first, I'm just smashing it down a little bit, and then we'll use our rolling pin. So I'm kind of eyeballing the size. I'm gonna make sure that that dough doesn't stick too much to the board. Gotta keep flouring it. And at other thing we can do is actually flour the pin just a little bit. We're getting there. This is going to be a very flaky crust because of all the butter that's in it. When you're making this dough, you want to use ice cold water because you don't want to melt that butter at all. You want to keep it, you can actually see some of it sticking there on the board. You want to keep it intact. I think we're getting there with this thickness. It's good. In. It will tend to want to stick because of the butter to both the board and the rolling pin, so it's super important to keep flouring it. So at this point I have all these rough edges. I'm going to tuck them in. Trying to get a consistent crust. I'm actually going to lay it over the top and hang it over the edges. So I'm a little bit thicker here, a little bit thinner here, so I'm going to work on this area here. I'm going to put a little extra flour underneath. We're getting there. This doesn't have to be perfect because it's hanging off of the edges. I do want to try and avoid any of these cracks that are in here though. And one more little dust here. I was just feeling for how thick we are here because I want to try and make sure that we're even all over. And I think this is what we're going to go with. So picking this guy up is not going to be the easiest of things. I'm going to flour it. I'm actually going to use my roller. Tuck the edges in. Which will help bring it away from the board a little bit. I'm actually going to dust the roller again and pick up the dough and bring it with me on the roller. And hope that it all wants to come with me. This is my least favorite part of baking. And it may have underestimated how sticky the dough would be, and some of it is still sticking to the board, so this is a little bit tricky here. You can actually see it sticking to the board here. So here it comes. Here's our dough, and now I'm going to lay it over the top. And unroll it. This guy over here on the cutting board so you can see a little bit better. So these few little cracks aren't going to be a huge deal. I'm actually going to score the crust, and then we'll put it in the oven. I'll score it with this guy right here. So with this, I'm just going to kind of go simple with what I'm scoring. We'll go 4 there, and this will go in. So we will put this in the oven, and we will see you in about 40 minutes for the unveiling. Cheers.